close your eyes for a moment and imagine a silence so deep it feels heavy, long before the first brick of Yharnam was ever laid, long before the smell of incense and burnt flesh filled the streets of the cathedral ward. There was a silence that lived deep within the earth. It was the silence of the Pthumerians. To understand why Yharnam fell, we have to go down. We have to travel beneath the cobblestones, past the sewers, and into the cold, damp dark of the tombs. The Pthumerians weren't just people. They were something more, or perhaps something less, depending on how you view the evolution of the soul. They were superhuman guardians, ancient and tall, who served as the first stewards of the great ones. They didn't build cities for themselves. They built cathedrals for entities that existed outside of time. When we look at the architecture of the Chalice dungeons, we see the blueprint for what Yharnam would eventually become. The pointed arches, the oppressive story, the sense that every hallway was designed to make a human feel small and insignificant. The Pthumerians found something in the dark. They found the old blood. It's strange to think that the very substance that built Yharnam was already a relic of a dead civilization by the time humans found it. The Pthumerians were led by a lineage of queens, the most famous of whom gave the city its name, Queen Yharnam. She is a figure of tragic, haunting beauty, often seen in the deepest layers of the dungeons, wearing a blood-stained white dress, her hands bound. Why was she bound? Why was her stomach stained with the blood of an unborn child? The lore suggests that the Pthumerians were successful in what the humans of the Healing Church would later fail at. They actually managed to make contact. They reached out into the cosmos, and the cosmos reached back. But the touch of a great one is not gentle. It is a thing of biological horror and metaphysical weight. Queen Yharnam was chosen to be a surrogate, a vessel for a child of the Great Ones. Mergo, when you hear the crying of a baby in the distance while you walk through the nightmare, you are hearing the echo of that ancient Pthumerian tragedy. The Pthumerians didn't just disappear. They were consumed by their devotion. They became hollowed out, husks of their former selves, wandering the labyrinths as shadows. They are the warning that the city of Yharnam ignored. They showed that when you invite the divine into the physical world begins to tear at the seams. Imagine those early explorers from Byrgenwerth descending into those tombs for the first time. The air would have been stale, smelling of dust and dried copper. They found the carvings, the statues of tentacled beings, and the pools of preserved blood that refused to dry. They didn't see a graveyard. They saw a gold mine of evolution. They saw a way to transcend the human condition. They took that blood, that ancient, corrupted Pthumerian legacy, and they carried it back up to the surface. And that, truly, was the beginning of the end. The Pthumerian civilization was the first to fall to the scourge, though they called it something else. They became the first beasts, the first distorted versions of humanity. In the dungeons, you see the shadows of Yharnam, those tall, hooded figures that serve the queen even in death. They're a bridge between the ancient world and the modern one. They remind us that the blood has a memory. It doesn't matter how many centuries pass. The blood remembers the pact made with the great ones. When the citizens of Yharnam began to inject themselves with this substance, they weren't just taking a medicine. They were inviting an ancient sleeping curse to wake up inside their veins. The city of Yharnam was built directly on top of these labyrinths. It's a literal layers of history situation. The closer you are to the ground, the closer you are to the Pthumerian madness. This is why the lower parts of the city, like old Yharnam, fell so quickly and so violently. The foundations were already rotten. The Pthumerians had already proven that humanity cannot house the thoughts of a great one without losing its shape. Yet, the scholars of Bergenworth looked at the ruins of Thumeru and thought, we can do better. They thought their intellect would protect them. Where the Pthumerians' devotion had failed, it was the ultimate height of human arrogance. Now, let's move away from the cold damp of the dungeons and travel to the edge of a quiet, sun-dappled lake. This is Bergenworth. It's a small place, really, just a manor and a lighthouse nestled among the trees. But it is the most important location in the history of the world. This is where the match was struck that would eventually burn Yharnam to the ground. Provost Willem was the head of this institution. You can imagine him sitting in his rocking chair on the balcony, looking out over the moonside lake, his mind swirling with thoughts that no human was ever meant to have. Willem was a man of caution, which is a rare thing in this story. He understood, perhaps too late, that the blood they had found in the dungeons was dangerous. He coined the phrase that every hunter knows by heart, fear the old blood. But why did he fear it? To Willem, the blood was a shortcut. He believed that for humanity to truly evolve, we needed eyes on the inside. He wanted to elevate human consciousness, to push the brain to a point where it could perceive the multidimensional layers of reality. He saw the blood as something that appealed to the flesh, and the flesh was weak. The flesh was what turned into beasts. If you focus on the body, you become a monster. If you focus on the mind, you might become a god. That was his gamble. But among his students, there was a young man named Lawrence. Lawrence was charismatic, ambitious, and perhaps a bit more pragmatic than his master. He saw the suffering of the people. He saw that the blood had miraculous healing properties. It could cure any disease, mend any bone, and provide a sense of euphoria that no drug could match. Lawrence didn't want to sit in a library and grow eyes on his brain. He wanted to change the world. He wanted to use the blood to build a utopia. The schism between Willem and Lawrence is one of the most quiet yet violent moments in the lore. There is a cinematic where we see them speaking. Willem sits in his chair, already looking frail, warning Lawrence that they are thinking on the basest of planes. Lawrence, respectful but firm, tells his master that he is leaving. He takes the blood with him. He takes the secret of the Pthumerians and walks away from the lake toward the valley where Yharnam would rise. When Lawrence left Bergenworth, he didn't just leave a school, he started a religion. He understood that people wouldn't just follow a doctor, but they would follow a savior. He founded the healing church. He took the holy medium of the blood and turned it into a sacrament. He told the people of the valley that their illnesses were a thing of the past. All they had to do was give their faith to the church, and in return, they would receive the blood. But back at Bergenworth, Willem became obsessed with his own path. He stayed by the lake, and his student began to transform. Some became the Garden of Eyes, those fly-like creatures that haunt the grounds. They are the result of Willem's experiments with insight. They have the eyes he wanted, but they have lost their humanity, just as surely as the beasts in the city. Willem eventually retreated into a state of near catatonia, staring at the water. He knew that the Great One Ram was hidden beneath the waves, holding back the veil. He knew that as long as Ram lived, the true horrors of what Lawrence was doing would be hidden. The blood moon would stay behind the clouds. The people of Yharnam would go about their lives, unaware that they were living in a nightmare. Willem's silence was his final act of protection, or perhaps his final act of cowardice. He couldn't stop Lawrence, so he tried to hide the consequences. The tragedy of Byrgenwerth is that both men were right, and both men were horribly wrong. Willem was right that the blood would lead to beasthood, but his own path of insight led to a different kind of monstrosity, a cold, unfeeling transformation into something alien. Lawrence was right that the blood could build a city, but he failed to realize that a city built on blood is a city built on a foundation of sand. It can only last until the tide comes in. As you listen to this, try to picture the forest surrounding Byrgenwerth, the forbidden woods. They were once the path between the school and the city, but they were sealed off to hide the truth. The woods are filled with snakes and shadows now, a physical manifestation of the corruption that seeped out of the school. The scholars thought they were the smartest men in history. They thought they were the masters of their own destiny, but they were just children playing with the discarded toys of the great ones. And the great ones are not kind to children who break their things. Imagine the valley as it was before the spires reached for the clouds. It was a place of modest stone dwellings, a settlement defined by its isolation. But when Lawrence arrived from Byrgenwerth, he brought a fire with him. Not a fire that burns, but a fire that consumes the soul. He brought the old blood. He didn't just offer a cure, he offered a transformation. And the people of the valley, tired of the frailties of the human body, drank deeply. The founding of the Healing Church is perhaps the most significant turning point in the history of this world. Lawrence understood something that Master Willem never did. Power doesn't come from secret knowledge held in a library. It comes from dependency. By establishing blood ministration, Lawrence made the church the singular heartbeat of the city. If you were sick, you went to the church. If you were tired, you went to the church. If you wanted to feel a strength beyond your natural limits, you went to the church. Slowly, the architecture of the city began to change. Yharnam grew upward. This is a very important detail for the atmosphere of our story. The Healing Church didn't just build buildings, they built a hierarchy of stone. The cathedral ward, with its massive, sweeping buttresses and golden statues, was designed to make the common man feel like an ant in the presence of a giant. When you walk through the cathedral ward today, even in its ruined state, you can feel that intentional design. The tall, narrow windows, the way the light struggles to reach the street level, it was all meant to remind the citizens that the blood they drank was a gift from a higher power. But where did this blood come from? This is the dark secret that Lawrence kept hidden behind the beautiful liturgy of the church. It wasn't just holy blood, it was being harvested. We find clues in the research hall and the upper cathedral ward. The church was using blood saints, women like Adela or Ariana, who were chosen for their special blood quality. These women were essentially treated as living fountains, their veins tapped to provide the liquid that the city craved. It's a parasitic relationship disguised as a divine blessing. The city became addicted, not just in a physical sense, but in a cultural sense. Yharnam became the center of the world for medical pilgrims. People traveled from far away, just like our protagonist, the hunter, seeking the Yharnam blood to cure their incurable ailments. Lawrence had succeeded in making Yharnam a beacon of hope, but that hope was built on a foundation of stolen divinity. As the church grew, so did its internal complexity. It wasn't just doctors anymore. They needed protectors. They needed administrators. They needed the black church doctors and the white church doctors. You see them in the game, wearing those terrifying masks with the long beaks. Those masks weren't just for show. They were filled with incense to drown out the smell of the very thing they were creating, the rot of the beast. These doctors weren't there to heal the people. They were there to monitor the progress of the scourge. They were scientists in priests' clothing, watching as their miracle began to turn the population into something else. Think about the sheer scale of the Grand Cathedral. When you stand at the foot of the altar where Vicar Amelia eventually succumbs to her beastly nature, you are standing at the epicenter of Lawrence's dream. It's a place of immense beauty and immense horror. The church taught the people that the blood was sacred, but Lawrence knew it was a ticking time bomb. He spent his final days trying to find a way to control the fire he had started. But the blood of the great ones cannot be controlled by the hands of men. The fall of the church didn't happen overnight. It was a slow decay, a gradual darkening of the city's heart. The more blood they consumed, the more they needed. The more they needed, the more accidents happened in the back alleys. People began to grow hair where they shouldn't. Their teeth began to sharpen. Their limbs began to elongate. And the church's response? They didn't stop the ministration. They simply created the hunters to clean up the mess. In the early days of the scourge, the transformations weren't a citywide riot. They were isolated incidents. A man would go home to his family, and by morning, he wasn't a man anymore. The church couldn't have the public knowing that their holy medicine was turning people into monsters. They needed a scalpel. They needed someone who could move in the shadows and remove the infected before the panic spread. This is where Gehrman enters our story. Gehrman, the first hunter. If you visit the abandoned old workshop in the game, hidden away behind a series of treacherous drops in the cathedral ward, you see the humble beginnings of what would become a bloody tradition. It doesn't look like a legendary base of operations. It's a small wooden shack with a few workbenches and a lonely doll. This was Gehrman's world. He didn't use the heavy armor of a knight or the bulky weapons of a soldier. He designed tools that were quick, efficient, and terrifying. The trick weapons. Gehrman's philosophy was built on speed and the art of the hunt. He believed that a hunter should not be bogged down by heavy gear because A beast is always faster and stronger than a human. To survive, you had to be more graceful than the monster. His signature weapon, the burial blade, is a masterpiece of craftsmanship, a curved scythe that mimics the movements of a reaper. It's a poetic choice, really. German wasn't just a killer. He was a harvester of blades that had gust wrong. But German wasn't alone. He had apprentices. One of the most famous, of course, was Lady Maria of Canehurst. Her presence in the workshop changed everything. She brought the elegance of her royal bloodline to the brutal work of the hunt. But more importantly, her relationship with German highlights the human cost of this life. When Maria eventually discarded her weapon, the rakuyo, into a well out of guilt for what they had done at the fishing hamlet, it broke German. It led him to create the doll, a silent, wooden imitation of the woman he couldn't save. The hunters of the old workshop operated in secret. They wore everyday clothes, trousers, waistcoats, and capes, so they could blend into the fog. They were the unseen cleaners of Yharnam. But as the scourge grew and the blood became more potent and the transformations more frequent, the old workshop could no longer keep up. The scalpel was no longer enough. The church needed an army. This is when the church officially took over the hunt. They sidelined German and his quaint methods. They established the church hunters, led by Ludwig. If German was the scalpel, Ludwig was the broadsword. He brought the hunt into the light. He gave the hunters uniforms. He gave them the holy blade and taught them that they were warriors of the faith. He told the citizens of Yharnam that they should join the hunt themselves. This was a disastrous mistake. By involving the public, the church turned the hunt into a feverish, paranoid blood sport. The citizens, already half crazed by the blood in their veins, took to the streets with torches and saws. They weren't hunting beasts to save the city. They were hunting because the blood told them to. The quiet, dignified art of German was replaced by the screaming, chaotic mess of the Yharnam mob. German, meanwhile, was forgotten. He was pulled into the hunter's dream, a prisoner of the moon presence, forced to guide new hunters through a night that never ends. His workshop in the real world was abandoned, left to rot, as the city he protected crumbled. When we find it, we realize that the entire history of the hunters is one of betrayal. They were used by the church to hide the truth and then discarded when they were no longer convenient. Their things